Hello again and welcome back. I'm glad you're watching again today. I'm Father Jason Tyler, pastor at St. Joseph Catholic Church in Fayetteville, and this will be the last of my Interregnum video series. So again, I appreciate you having watched with me. I know it's been a few days. Actually, the last one I recorded was Thursday morning. I recorded it about an hour before learning that that we had a pope, that an hour before hearing about the white smoke and everything. And so again, it's been a few days, but then again, the interregnum is actually over. We have a pope, and so we're no longer in that interregnum. I do want to just share a few thoughts, though, about Pope Leo XIV, about what we're seeing from him in his first few days as pope, what we're likely to see over the next week or so. But before getting into all that, just to mention, the one thing a lot of people have been asking me is, did you expect this? Did you see this coming? And I got to say, no, I did not expect this. I did not see this coming. In the different lists of papabili, remember that's it's a very subjective term of whatever a particular writer or journalist believes, might be someone who could be pope. I did see at some point Cardinal Prevost's name on some of those lists, but not on all of them. And then even some of the lists that had him at the beginning, toward the end, they were saying, no, it looks like that's not going to happen, or whatever support was there before doesn't seem to be there. And of course, I go back to, I think I mentioned this previously, there's a saying, those who talk don't know, those who know don't talk. And so, the ability to really predict who is coming out of this as Pope is not by any means an easy thing. That's why, again, the process is done in secret as a way to give the cardinals full freedom to speak to one another, to discern, where they believe the Holy Spirit is leading them, what they believe the church needs, and who they think will do the best job in guiding the church along the way. So I did not expect to see a pope from the USA. Certainly, if there were to be one from the U.S., Prevost was the one that was probably most likely this time around. I know some lists would mention Cardinal Dolan, but I think Cardinal Prevost, previously Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, had, with his missionary experience, his time in Peru, had a little more of a international connection in that way. And so, that certainly would have helped in the process of cardinals looking at who could be pope. So just a couple words, though, about, how we heard about the big announcement and everything. I was actually doing a TV interview at the time. Channel 4029 had called earlier on Thursday morning and said they wanted to just interview me about what the conclave process is like, what should we expect, what's going on, that sort of thing. And we had set up at the time for 11 a.m. And I told the reporter when he arrived, I said, there's a small chance we'll get a pope elected while you and I are talking. And I didn't really quite expect it then, because by that point it would have been the fourth ballot, and Pope Benedict XVI was elected on the fourth ballot, Pope Francis on the fifth, but there was all this chatter, again, from those who talk but don't know, that this conclave was going to run longer. So I thought it would be at least Friday before we had a successful election. But nonetheless, the smoke went up. It was around 11:10 in the morning for us in Arkansas when I heard what had happened, and sure enough, I was in the middle of being interviewed when we heard about it, and basically, I think whatever I was talking about in that interview got trashed. There was no need for that footage because it was already out of date by the time I was done speaking, in the sense that the conclave was indeed over. And instead, I spoke about, what we were doing at St. Joseph, and then invited that reporter to join us down in the gym where we had many of our students gather. It's a little complicated at school because it was lunchtime, right? Those kids have got to eat. But we were prepared there. Our school principal, Deacon Jason Polmeyer, he was setting up a projector in the cafeteria so the kids could eat lunch and watch what was going on. Kids who were not eating lunch, again, they were to go down to the gym. And so, again, thanks to him and thanks to the teachers for preparing them, not only in that moment, but really the preparation they did, in the time leading up to the election had the kids excited for it. I mentioned, I was in the middle of that interview when the white smoke went up. Well, I could hear from our cafeteria, which is right next to the church space, I could hear some cheering going up from our students. And just before that, I'd heard that someone was saying something on the intercom, although I couldn't tell what. But I knew when I heard that cheering, especially right after an intercom announcement, it had to be that a pope was elected. And so, when I went down and again watched it in the gym, when Cardinal Mamberti announced, HABEMUSPapam, and he said, Robertum Franciscum, right away I thought, oh my gosh, Robert Francis. I said, the only papabile that has that first name, or first and middle name in this case, would be Cardinal Prevost from the U.S., and then, of course, he says a few other words and says Prevost, and I'm on the mic there with our students, and I said, he just said that they've elected Cardinal Robert Prevost, who's taking the name Leo XIV. I said, guys, he was born in Chicago. And I said, we have an American Pope, and the kids are screaming, they're really excited. And then on their own, no adult prompting them, the kids just started chanting, USA, USA. Which, they're kids. That's a good excitement that they're showing. Obviously, he's the Pope now. He's not the American Pope. He's not the United States Pope. He's the Pope of the Church throughout the world. And so his responsibility is very much for the universal Church and in being pastor to the world, as it were. So we should not try to pigeonhole him, so to speak, in that way. And in fact, I think he himself is working to avoid that. You notice when he came out on the loggia and gave his initial address, he did it mostly in Italian. He's the Bishop of Rome now. That's what the Bishop of Rome does, is speak to the crowd there in Italian. He also then mixed in a bit of Spanish, and it's a very particular reason why he did, because he says at one point, goes, let me say a couple words to the people that were my diocese of Chiclayo. That's in Peru. That's where he was served as bishop for, I think, 8 or 9 years maybe. And he had only left that diocese about 2 years ago. So he had been bishop in Chiclayo, Peru for that time. And then in 2023, Pope Francis called him to Rome, appointed him the prefect for the dicastery for bishops, basically to help vet new bishops from around the world. And that's what he's done the last 2 years. And I can imagine someone with missionary experience, someone who, although, yes, he had some leadership roles within his religious order with the Augustinians. He was their leader for a while. I forget the exact title. But he was the leader there of the Augustinian order. But he was the bishop of a diocese in Chiclayo. And then to be pulled out of that and put into a Vatican office, it's not necessarily the easiest transition in the world. And it's kind of going from being pastor to being bureaucrat in a sense, right? So the fact that he would feel that affection for the Diocese of Chiclayo and his people there, perfectly understandable. Probably the last 2 years in Rome, he was thinking, gosh, I really enjoyed being in Chiclayo with those people. I really enjoyed seeing that grow. And now I'm in the office every day, and I'm not working around regular people. I'm working with other priests and maybe a few religious here and there and other church bureaucrats. And at any rate, it would not surprise me. He's not said this, but I'm guessing it would not surprise me that while he's been in Rome these last couple of years, sort of longed for the experience he had back in Chiclayo. And that would be part of why he felt that need to speak to them in particular. And so the few words he said in Spanish were to address himself to the people in Peru, in Chiclayo, Peru, where he had been bishop. Now, he did not speak in English, and a few people got really upset about that. But frankly, I think that was a smart move on his part. Again, he doesn't want to be pigeonholed. He doesn't want to be labeled the American Pope. John Paul II had to confront this as well in a different sort of way, because John Paul II was the first non-Italian in 400 and something years. And so John Paul II goes out there in 1978, and he says, they have called him from a faraway land, saying all this in Italian, of course. And people cheered, and then at some point he says, if I make a mistake in our Italian language, I know you will correct me. And the way he used the word correct, he actually said the word correct incorrectly. And so he was actually making a joke there already that you have to be able to really understand Italian to get, but it'd be as if you were saying in English, if I make a mistake in English, I know you will correct me or something like that, or instead of correct, if you said correct or correct or something, where you've got just one letter difference or something. That's kind of the equivalent of what John Paul II there did. So that line was taken. Didn't expect Pope Leo XIV to say exactly that same thing that John Paul II had done. But again, by speaking primarily in Italian, just a little bit of Spanish, by not using the English, he is in a sense avoiding being seen primarily as the American Pope, even as much as, we can take a certain pride here in this country that he came from our country. Now, if he would have spoken in English, would not have been a horrible thing either, because English is a very international language. He would have made himself understood not only by Americans, but obviously Canadians, British, Australian, Nigerians, Indians, many, many others around the world, Filipinos, many people who use English either as their primary language or as a very strong secondary language. So I think we will see him using English at various times as the years go by, depending on his audience. One thing I noticed, too, when he came out on the loggia, he used a text, and he held it himself. Now, he's the first pope who has come out on the loggia with a text in his hand on what he's going to say to people. A couple of reasons for that, in terms of him being the first. Keep in mind, prior to October 1978, no popes had given any sort of address when they went out on the loggia. That was something John Paul II changed. He innovated, if you will. Prior popes, and I went and looked this up on YouTube. I found the introduction of Paul VI in 1963 and the introduction of John Paul II in August of 78. You have the Cardinal Protodeacon who goes out and says HABEMUSPapam. He says the name of the Pope, the name he's taking. Then the new Pope comes out, and he just gives the Urbi et Orbi blessing, which is that blessing it's in Latin. It's got a formula to it. It's a prescribed text, if you will. So John Paul II spoke a heck of a lot more Italian that evening than John Paul I had a couple months before, or that Paul VI had, and that sort of thing. But ever since John Paul II, every pope since then has spoken a bit. Benedict XVI, Francis, and now Leo XIV have all given a short address after being presented. But the other three previously just spoke off the cuff or spoke without a text. Pope Leo had his text there with him. One thing we saw as well, Pope Leo was wearing the red mozzetta. Now, you kind of have to be kind of a super church nerd to maybe notice some of these things, but the red mozzetta is kind of like the shoulder cape that popes would typically wear when they come out on the loggia, and it's worn at some other times. It would not be worn during Mass, but certain times outside of Mass, when maybe there's a formal blessing, a liturgical event that's not Mass, the Pope might wear that. So because when he's being presented to the world, he's going to give the Urbi et Orbi blessing, it is a liturgical event in that sense. And so other popes, yes, had worn the red mozzetta with a stole over it. Pope Francis did not do that, and that was kind of in keeping with his desire to keep things simple. But I got to say, I like seeing Pope Leo wear it because I think he's wanting to connect himself to the broader tradition of the Church. He is not in any way saying we're going to ignore the last 12 years. In fact, he's explicitly come out and said he's wanting to continue, so much of what Pope Francis has done. But I think he's putting an emphasis on saying, I'm continuing what's happened before, but I'm also continuing not just the last 12 years, I'm continuing the last 2,000 years. And so as a result, he wore the red mozzetta. And it sounds as though, I believe we had a couple of reports come out that said he's going to live in the Apostolic Palace, which is the Pope's residence. And that's, most every Pope for the last few hundred years have lived in the Apostolic Palace. Pope Francis decided to live in the Vatican guest house, and he said at the time, when Pope Francis did, when he decided to live in Casa Santa Marta, that it was because he wanted to be around other people. He said it was psychologically unhealthy for him to stay in the Apostolic Palace because he's kind of alone over there. Now, the reality is he's never fully alone, in as much as you've always got guards around, you've always got aides of some sort or another. But no one else lives in the Apostolic Palace. And so I think he liked the idea of living in a place where other people lived. And that's not a bad desire by any means. At the same time, what people noticed, or what people learned, and I don't mean the public at large, but I mean the people within the Vatican and watching everything, I think kind of noticed that, gosh, it actually costs more to the Vatican for the Pope to live over in the guest house, because you've got to secure 2 locations. You've got to secure the place where he's sleeping at night, but then he still had his working office at the Apostolic Palace, and so that had to be secured as well. And so I like the idea of the Pope living in the Apostolic Palace, just like I like the idea of the President of the United States living in the White House. And if some future president decided he did not want to live in the White House, that he wanted to live somewhere else for whatever reason, well, you'd have some wasted space in the White House, and you'd have to secure the White House where the president would still presumably have an office and be working, and you'd have to secure the place where he's actually sleeping. And so it's kind of what we see in the Vatican. If the Pope is not living in the Apostolic Palace, it kind of creates 2 different security bubbles that have to be maintained, as well as other complications, I'm sure. And so, again, I think Pope Francis had good motivations and reasons for living as he did, but I also think having gone through that and seen that, I think if Pope Leo does indeed live in the Apostolic Palace, we need to understand the Apostolic Palace was kind of built for that purpose, and not to use it means some living quarters are just not being used. They're being wasted, as it were. So, and it's not luxurious within the papal apartments. I've seen pictures, and it's not like dirt floors or something of that sort, but it's also not gold faucets or whatever else. So, at any rate, so we'll see how that plays out. A few pictures of Pope Leo in video that we've seen around in different places. It seems he's wearing black shoes. A very small thing, I know, but most popes had worn red shoes and the symbolism with the red shoes was to say that it was the blood of the martyrs that was sustaining the Pope and his ministry, and especially the Pope being a successor of Peter, who was martyred. The city of Rome kind of recognizing its faith being built on Peter and Paul, who were both martyred. That was the reason for the red shoes. Honestly, here's the thing. I never noticed that the Pope wore red shoes until people started making a big deal of Pope Francis not wearing red shoes. And so if Pope Leo sticks with black shoes, not a big deal. And my guess is then the red probably won't come back. When you have 2 popes in a row that do it, it kind of, locks things in a little bit more in a way that's not true just for once. Kind of like when I mentioned John Paul II gave the little talk when he was presented, and then the fact that other popes have followed up. That's now the expectation everyone has when a new pope is presented to the world, is that he will say a few words. A couple things also that have happened since the election. Pope Leo had a mass for the College of Cardinals in the Sistine Chapel on Friday morning. He preached in Italian with a prepared text, but then he said a few words off the cuff in English at the beginning, and he visited then on Saturday, I believe it was, the shrine of Our Lady of Good Counsel in Genazzano, just outside of Rome, and that's a place that's apparently very special to the Augustinian order. He visited also in the last few days tombs of his predecessors. So he visited the tomb of Pope Francis over at St. Mary Major, as well as the tombs of several popes at St. Peter's Basilica. And again, I think he's doing a couple of things. One is he's praying for their intercession. He's saying, guys, I'm in this big role that you've had before. Please pray for me. And again, it's also showing his recognition of continuity, not just with Pope Francis, but with all the popes that came before him. And so I think we're going to see, I think we're going to see him bring out some of the best qualities of several previous popes. At least that's my prayer and hope at this point as well. On Sunday, Pope Leo had the Regina Caeli prayer that he led from the central loggia of St. Peter's. Now, Regina Caeli is it's Latin for Queen of Heaven, and it's a prayer that's traditionally prayed during the Easter season. Queen of Heaven, rejoice, alleluia. It goes for, I actually can remember it better in Latin than I can in English, but the Pope on Sundays throughout the year normally prays the Angelus, but during the Easter season, they pray the Regina Caeli instead of the Angelus. And two things that were interesting about, I think the Pope always gives some remarks there as well. Two things interesting with the way Pope Leo did it. One, it was on the central loggia and not from the papal apartment. Now, I think that's probably just logistical reasons. The papal apartment, it was sealed when Pope Francis died. I think it was eventually unsealed by Sunday afternoon, possibly Monday morning. All my dates are kind of information's running through my head at different times at this point. But if it had not been unsealed yet, then that window that the Pope had normally used to greet the people, well, that kind of wasn't available. And so the central loggia is is a place that makes a lot of sense. Typically, the central loggia has only been used for the presentation of a new pope, as we saw last Thursday, as well as the Urbi et Orbi blessings for Christmas and Easter. So I'm guessing we'll go back by next Sunday or the next time he does the Regina Caeli address. He'll do it from the window again, the window that is of the papal apartments. But we'll wait and see, kind of how that plays out. But that'd be my guess, is that he'll go back to doing it from the papal apartment. Monday morning, he had sort of a press conference. Not really a press conference because I don't think he took questions, but he had an address to journalists who had been covering the papal transition, over these last few weeks. He led off in English there, just as he did with the cardinals on Friday morning. He said a few words, actually made a joke about, everyone applauding at the beginning doesn't really mean anything, but we'll see if you're still awake by the end. And again, jokes are one of the things that translate the least well, and so he probably wants to make certain he's speaking exactly what he intends to speak, and so using English at that point, but then speaking Italian for his prepared remarks. And his Italian is very clear, by the way. I don't have any difficulty recognizing and following what he's saying there. He definitely uses that language well. But it does seem when he's going to speak off the cuff, he seems to be not speaking in Italian as much there, possibly because he just is very, very concerned about being precise, and possibly, a little uncertainty or lack of confidence with Italian, and I may be reading into that. But again, as someone who grew up speaking English but has used Spanish a lot in his pastoral ministry, Italian is very similar to Spanish. And so Spanish and Italian, one can help you learn the other. And that was my experience. I learned Italian first and then later Spanish. One can help you learn the other. But then it's really easy to confuse them. I don't use Italian much at all anymore, so I rarely have an Italian word slip into my Spanish. But it does still happen every now and then. But if I, for some reason, have to use Italian, like I'll be in Italy in June, I can understand it pretty well, but a lot of times Spanish comes out because I use Spanish so much more often these days. So it's possible that Pope Leo wants to make certain he doesn't have a Spanish word slip into the Italian. And sometimes when that happens, everybody understands exactly what you're saying and it makes sense. But sometimes two words in those languages can be very, very similar, but actually have some pretty different meanings. And so there's good reason for someone who's got both of those languages in his head to be really careful about not crossing them up. And so anyway, that's some of my thoughts on what he's doing linguistically and the fact that most of the time when he's speaking Italian, it's with a prepared text. Other events coming up. The inaugural Mass is coming up on Sunday the 18th, so that will be the fifth Sunday of Easter. And again, that's not an installation. A lot of media reports are calling it an installation. That's not accurate because he's already the Bishop of Rome. There's no installing to happen. It's not an inauguration in the sense of of a presidential inauguration, where that's really the beginning of the term. But it's more, I think they call it something like the solemn inauguration of the pontificate. It's like, hey, I'm already Pope, but I'm having this celebration of being Pope and a chance to sort of outline in a formal way my priorities and goals and hopes. Also, he'll be invested with the pallium that goes around the neck and comes down, that you'll see him wearing when he celebrates Mass in the future after that point. On Sunday the 25th, he will take possession officially of the Basilica of St. John Lateran and the Basilica of St. Mary Major. St. John Lateran is actually the cathedral of the Diocese of Rome. It's not St. Peter's, but instead it's St. John Lateran. And a new bishop always has to officially take possession of his cathedral, and that's true at the diocesan level as well. If it can often happen that a bishop is installed not in his cathedral but somewhere else, because the cathedral's maybe not big enough to host his installation. In that case, at some point later, he would officially go and take possession of his cathedral, which usually is just a Mass, and there's maybe, I don't remember what else is involved besides the Mass, if there's a particular oath or a particular declaration or something that happens there. But at any rate, Pope Leo the 14th will take possession of the Lateran Basilica and St. Mary Major Basilica on the 25th. St. Mary Major, not the Cathedral of Rome, but it is a papal basilica, and so there's an official Pope taking possession of it ceremony there, as it were. So, again, I thank you all for watching. This is, I know, a very long video compared to my others, but I wanted to kind of get all my wrap-up thoughts into one rather than spreading it out, because if I'm not careful, I could keep going with this, and I appreciate those of you who've told me that you enjoyed these. I'd love to keep doing something like this, but it does take up some time, and so I won't have an ongoing video series of any sort. Could there be other videos in the future? Maybe. Someone suggested some different possibilities, not on a daily basis, maybe something like monthly or whatever, where I might give thoughts on, what's happening liturgically in the year, or perhaps what's happening in the broader church, things that don't fit as well into, say, a typical homily. I could do something like that, but no promises at this point. We'll just kind of see where things go. I do want to thank Hilda Valle for her help in editing these videos. I sit down and I record them, and then I just send them to her. She takes care of getting them online and making sure that they're presentable and everything there. And so I do thank Hilda for her help with these. And again, thanks to all of you for watching. Have a great day. And again, as always, as we're in the Easter season, Happy Easter.